أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله بارئ الخلائق الأجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء حبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد ثم الصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين لا سيما ولي الله الحجة ابن الحسن صاحب الأمر والزمان اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء ولعنة الله على أعدائهم وعلى منكري فضائلهم من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين آمين رب العالمين. أما بعد، قال الله تعالى في كتابه الحكيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه صدق الله العلي العظيم وآمنا به. زينوا ونوروا مجالسكم بذكر محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه ولن أعداءه. أحبائي, we are gathered here tonight to commemorate the destruction and the desecration of the blessed mausoleums within Jannatul Baqee Al-Muqaddas in the holy city of Medina Al-Munawwara, and the destruction and the desecration of the graves of the holy and pious family members of Rasulullah in the blessed city of Makkah Al-Mukarramah within the graveyard known as Jannatul Mu'alla, and to commemorate the destruction and the desecration of the graves of the martyrs and the shuhada of the battle of Uhud, and at the very head of them, the lion of Allah and his prophet, Sayyid Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, Salamullahi alayhi. Ahibai, the destruction of Jannatul Baqee has a deep standing history and has inspiration in its roots from those people who perpetrated the crimes of Saqifa and opened the doors of dhulm upon Ahlul Bayt. Particularly when you have geopolitical, theological commentary and understanding for these sorts of current events in the backdrop of the Hadith and the Quran. And from the Hadith, you have Ziyarat Ashura, الَّذِينَ أَسَّسُوا أَسَاسَ الظُّلْمِ الَّذِينَ أَسَّسُوا أَسَاسَ الظُّلْمِ, those who lay the core foundation, laid the initial foundation that opened the doors and gave the people audacity to commit crimes and violate the sanctity of Ahlul Bayt for the rest of the generations and for future generations to follow. Who founded those steps? الَّذِينَ أَسَّسُوا أَسَاسَ الظُّلْمِ, as for Ziyarat Ashura, the people of Saqifa. For understanding the geopolitical, theological commentary behind what drove these events is a lecture and an understanding on its own. However, for tonight's lecture, Ahibba'i, number one, I want to talk to you about the historical manner in which Jannatul Baqee was destroyed. And then the second part of the lecture, tying it to the importance of Jannatul Baqee, that should awaken a sense of awakening and a sense of action, a call of duty, a call of action towards standing up and protesting and demonstrating for the dhulm that happened at Jannatul Baqee, the intrinsic connection between Salat and the Wilayah. And how everything of this is murtabit with Jannatul Baqee, and what the destruction of Jannatul Baqee symbolizes as the destruction of deen in its entirety. And any other thing remaining from the deen after the destruction of Jannatul Baqee is nothing but a mockery of this very religion. Sure. Awalan, Ahibba'i, we start with the history of the destruction, the manner in which the destruction of Jannatul Baqee happened. First and foremost, for your information, Ahibba'i, Jannatul Baqee was not only destroyed once. Jannatul Baqee in history, in contemporary history, at least we can say, has been destroyed twice. The first time Jannatul Baqee was destroyed was in the year 1805 AD. 1805, and Ahna 2021, you are count, give or take, over 200 years, in 1221 AH after Hijrah. So in the year 1805, the historians mention that Hijaz was under the rule of the Ottoman Empire. And this is where the tribe of Ali Saud, rebel, ignorant tribesmen, Kuffar Aslan, got together and stood up in an uprising against the Ottoman Empire. And this was fueled by the conquest of land and territory and wealth. For they stood up against the Ottoman Empire, and after numerous attempts, the Ali Saud, or this tribe of Ali Saud, Lu'ana, La'natullahi alayhim, were able to take over the land of Hijaz, and having taken over the city of Mecca, they took over the city of Medina, and this is the first time in the year 1805 that they razed down Jannatul Baqee in its entirety, block for block to the ground, such that historians mention there were thousands of Muslims, Mushi'i, Muslims, non-Shia, and from the Shias who were the dwellers of the city of Medina, who had to flee the blessed city of Medina, Al-Munawwara, to escape the rampage and the death and the chaos caused by these Wahhabiyah. Historians come on to say that Ali Saud's rule at that time in the year 1805 was very brief, for indeed the Ottomans were able to regroup themselves. And when we speak about the Ottoman Empire and the struggle of Ali Saud, or the coming of Ali Saud into forceful power, we're not in a position of accrediting or favoring any one political party over the other, for indeed the Ottomans themselves committed grievous crimes against the Shia in their history of rule. فَلَا عَلَيْنَا بِالتَّفَاصِيل. We don't want to go into those sort of detail for the purpose of this lecture, but something bain al-Qawsayn, something between the brackets for you and I to keep in mind when it comes to understanding history and understanding governments that ruled in the name of Islam and the reality behind them. In any case, the Ottoman Empire was able to reclaim their rule back from Ali Saud, and having dispelled Ali Saud from the land of Hijaz, particularly from the cities of Mecca and Medina, they took the rule of these two blessed cities back under Ottoman control. And over here, the historians say that the Ottomans, together with contributions and efforts of Muslims across the world, were able to rebuild Jannatul Baqee with some of the most grandest architectures and some of the most splendid sites on earth in terms of mausoleums and in terms of Islamic heritage. There was no city more beautiful in its spirituality, in its architecture, in its multiculturalism when it came to the city of Medina al-Munawwara, such that we have even British adventurers and explorers who traveled into the land of Hijaz to get a glimpse of this city. And one of these explorers was by the name of Richard Burton. And Richard Burton, I believe in the mid, if not late 1800s, traveled to Medina disguised as an Afghani Muslim coming to the Islamic lands. So he disguised himself as an Afghani Muslim, adopted a Muslim name so that he could make the trip of pilgrimage and visit the city of Medina. And he narrates that the city of Medina, when he visited this is when, after the first destruction of Jannatul Baqee, the Ottoman Empire expelled Ali Saud, took control over the city of Mecca and Medina, and they rebuilt Jannatul Baqee with the highest level of splendor. Richard Burton says that when I visited the city of Medina, I counted within the city 55 mosques. 55 mosques that were unmatched in their architecture and in their splendor. And you have another explorer who comes forward, or adventurer who comes forward, and he says, again in the late 1800s, I visited the city of Medina to find it. And his description of the city is what? I found it to be a city with tall, shiny white walls for mosques, accompanied with a skyline of golden minaret in the backdrop of green fields. Yani the land of Medina, the fertility of the land of Medina from a farming perspective. This was the atmosphere and the environment of Jannatul Baqee in the late 1800s, after the first destruction, when it was rebuilt. And as we were saying, it was a global effort of the Muslims. And perhaps this is a lesson for history to record, that different Muslims from different cultures and different backgrounds in history have very, very few times, if any, been able to unite and have a unanimous stand over any single issue outside of Ahlul Bayt. Yani this is a proof that if you were to unite the Muslims, this unity can only happen on the basis of their love and their wilayah. More only love, but their wilayah for Ali Muhammad. And the wilayah means love, tawalli, accompanied with tabarri. Because there are those who claimed to love Ahlul Bayt, but sided with their enemies at the same time. Abu Huraira, who used to, in the battle of Siffin, would say, my salat is in the camp of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, but my dinner is in the camp of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. Falahadu, Ahibai. This was the city of Medina. This was Jannatul Baqee with its mausoleums and its qubba and its splendor and spirituality. And there was wealth in terms of gifts and artifacts that would be presented and would be stored and showcased in the harams of our blessed Imams, Al-Mujtaba, وزين العابدين والباكر والصادق صلوات الله وسلامه عليهم أئمة المسلمين. Their dharih, on top of the dharih and by the dharih, there were artifacts and gifts that were priceless from all over the world. Kings and rulers and traders, pure lovers of Ahlul Bayt, would bring weighty and expensive gifts as tokens of sacrifice and as symbols of love for the Imams that they were visiting. be it from the diamonds and the jewels and everything of that nature, was displayed inside of the haram of Ahlul Bayt, inside the haram of Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba. Wa subhanallah, how sweet are these words when you utter them. The haram of Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba, the haram of Imam Mohamed al-Baqee, the haram of Imam Zainul Abidin, and the haram of Imam al-Sadiq. How beautiful are these words, and how cooling is this sentiment to the heart when you ponder and you say, the haram of Sayyida al-Baneen, the mother of Abu al-Fadil. For these were entire mausoleums with their dharis that were built with all their splendor and all their glory and sanctity, until the Wahhabiyya, the Bani Umayyah and Bani Abbas of our time by the name of Ali Saud came into power in 1925 after multiple attempts to seize power from the Ottomans. They were able, or they gained victory through a bloody coup and a bloody invasion into the land of Hijaz, and in the 1924, I believe, they were able to gain full control over the cities of Mecca and Medina and drive away the Ottoman rule. For the year that they gained control over the cities, blessed cities of Mecca and Medina, in the second year, 1925, they embarked upon this heinous and this grievous crime of the second destruction of Jannatul Baqee. Shufu Ahibai, the manner in which they schemed the destruction of Jannat, the second destruction of Jannatul Baqee in 1925, after which Jannatul Baqee has never been rebuilt. The remains is as we see today. 1925, 8th of Shawwal, the Wahhabiyya planned to raise down the entire Jannatul Baqee. But how did they do this? How did they plot? How did they scheme this? Shufu the works of shayateen in action in front of you. The historians narrate that in order to destroy Jannatul Baqee in the month of Shawwal, the Wahhabiyya began to plan in advance. They began to plan from the month of Shahrul Ramadan, in fact. In fact, before Shahrul Ramadan of that year, 1925, they began to put their scheme and their plots together. So a clan of Ali Saud decided, and they began to contemplate, how are they going to destroy the shrines of Jannatul Baqee? Because the last time they destroyed it in 1805 and now 1925, years before, they saw that there was outrage and the entire Muslim Ummah got together and so on and so forth. So in order to mitigate the risk of a global reaction, global Muslim reaction, and negative sentiments against them and their power over government being threatened, they thought of a scheme. They said the graves of Ali Muhammad must go. Shufu this hatred for Ali Muhammad that runs in the veins of these enemies of humanity. They said the graves of Ali Muhammad must go. In fact, they went a step forward and they said the Quba of Rasulullah must also go. But how do we do it? So they sat and they schemed. Listen to this, Ahibai. How did they plan? They went to one of their scholars by the name of Sulaiman ibn Bulhaid or Balhid. Sulaiman ibn Balhid was the chief Qadi, the top-notch judge, the one who's at the head of the judiciary department, Islamic judiciary department, Islamic in their eyes. They went to this person, Sulaiman ibn Balhid, who was the judge, the top judge. And they said to him, our goal over here is to destroy and raise down the graves of Ali Muhammad. But this Sulaiman ibn Balhid, Nasibi, enemy of Ahlul Bayt. So they asked him and they got him to carry out this propaganda which would allow them to destroy the graves of Ali Muhammad. They went to a scholar to destroy the graves of Ali Muhammad. Keep these points in mind. Sulaiman ibn Balhid al-La'in, what did he do? The goal is to raise down the graves of Ali Muhammad. In the month of Shahrul Ramadan, 1925, he traveled to the city of Medina and then traveled to the city of Mecca. And in both cities, he gathered all the ulama who in the city of Medina claims to be a scholar, who in the city of Medina has a position of Imam al-Jama'ah, who in the city of Medina has been studying Islamic literature, and in the city of Mecca, gather all of them together. He would gather all these scholars in the city of Medina and he held for them, look at these keywords, look at these buzzwords, he held for them a theological seminar on how to be God-centric, on how the Ummah has deviated from being God-centric. What is the true meaning of Tawheed? Seminar by scholars on Tawheed. So they sat together and they discussed the validity or the permissibility, number one, of having a structure like a kubba or a dharih around the grave, number one. Number two, whether it is permissible to recite salat next to a grave. Number three, whether it is permissible to touch and to kiss the dharih or the mausoleums of this Ahlul Bayt. These three things, they began to have these theological debates, because the idea was this takes you away from God-centrism. The nikah started, and they had the ulama of different sects, from the Hanabila and the Shafi'is and the Malikis and the so on and so forth. And the Hanbalis have a history of hatred towards Ali Muhammad, particularly in the city of Baghdad, and the grief that they gave to the Shias of Ali Muhammad during the time of Sheikh Mufid, and so on and so forth. In any case, all these, the Shafis and the Malikis and the Hanbalis and the Hanafis, they got together under these Salafis and they began these debates from texts and analyzing hadith and the riwayat and so on and so forth. Historians tell us that Sulaiman ibn Balhid gathered all these scholars, put forward his opinion of how having a grave, having a kubba over the grave and salat and tawassul and wasila and kissing the shrines and all this is haram. He established this in his thesis in front of these seminars or within these seminars. And then they would secretly go and they would target every scholar who was present at that seminar, and they would coerce them to agree with Sulaiman ibn Balhid. They would go to the scholar, depending on his character. Some scholars were bribed with money to give the fatwa of haram against building a structure around the grave and doing tawassul. And there were those who could not be bought with money, so they were made to fear, they were threatened, and they had to fear for their lives. So in fear for their lives, they endorsed the fatwa, making it haram to build any structure over the graves of Ali Muhammad, or any structure over the graves. These fatwa that was collectively signed and endorsed by these type of religions, by these type of scholars, afwan, who sold their deen for the dunya. With this, when they gathered the 60, 70, 100 signatures or whatever it was, this fatwa now became the legitimate basis for Ali Saud to go and to raise down Jannatul Baqee to the ground. Shufu how people of religion used the religion to attack and to oppress Ali Muhammad. Justification of the deen to attack Ali Muhammad. This is the point of khutura. This is the point of danger. And how you see this throughout history, Ahibai, from the people who came, Nafsu Shi, the people who came to kill Sayyid al-Shuhada, alayhi salam, in the land of Karbala, Imam Sajjad, Salamullahi alayhi, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ruhi lahul fida, states that 30,000 people circled around. I'm paraphrasing the hadith of the Ma'soom Imam. 30,000 people surrounded or formed siege around my father, came to fight against my father on the day of Ashura. كلهم يتقربون إلى الله بقتله وبدمه. He says each and every one of these 30,000 people who came to fight Imam al-Hussein on Karbala from the army of Yazid, 30,000 people of that army makeup came on an ideological front, seeking proximity towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by the killing or through the killing of Imam al-Hussein. يَتَقَرَّبُونَ إِلَى اللَّهِ بِقَتْلِهِ. Meaning what? This is the Ma'soom Imam talking. Seeking proximity towards Allah. Yani they had a niyyah that they did on the day of Ashura. On the day of Ashura, there were two Salatul Fajrs. There was a Salatul Fajr on the side of Imam al-Hussein, and there was a Salatul Fajr on the side of Umar ibn Sa'ad al-La'in. Both camps recited Salatul Fajr, But يَتَقَرَّبُونَ إِلَى اللَّهِ بِدَمِهِ. Meaning what? After the Salatul Fajr, they collectively got together to perform a niyyah that we are killing Imam al-Hussein qurbatan ilallah. We're denying Ali al-Asghar water qurbatan ilallah. Justification of the deen to kill Ali Muhammad. And this, Ahibai, is sadly what we see. The corruption that exists on earth. The manipulation of religion for personal agenda. The manipulation of religion for political agendas. So who is there to speak against this? And what is the fate of those who spoke against this? Manipulation of religion on so many levels. Social levels, communal levels, economic levels, political levels. Anyone and everyone who wants to wiggle out or enforce their agenda, enforce their stances in life by manipulation of the deen. You find the aspects of the deen that suits you to fortify your position, and now this gives you legitimacy to do whatever you want. Ahibai, we have to be vigilant and careful against such stances, that we ourselves do not commit this in life, number one. Number two, to be vigilant so that we are not used as pawns in the war of other people who have nothing to do with religion but use religion. And the kalam in this is a lot. In any case, 1925, Ahibai, Sulaiman ibn Balhid al-La'in gathered these endorsements and these signatures for his fatwa to destroy, and officially the fatwa was that it is shirk to do tawassul, and it is kufr to have domes and structures around these graves, including the grave of Rasulullah. So they embarked upon this mission, Al Saud, where the entire Jannatul Baqee, in all its pomp and glory and sanctity, was razed down to the ground, block for block. Hundreds, if not thousands, of Muslims were massacred in the process, such that one of the eyewitnesses in the journal Qura, which was published on the 19th of Shawwal 1925, yani give or take 10 days after the destruction of Jannatul Baqee, yani first-hand eyewitnesses within a Sunni journal, it wasn't even a Shia journal, the journal Qura, they state that during the destruction of Jannatul Baqee, There were so many lives that were lost, killing and bloodshed that happened, such that there were dead bodies piled up by the date trees or the palm trees in and around the city of Medina. This is the history of how Ali Saud came into power. Not only did they destroy the haram to the ground in Jannatul Baqee, but Ali Saud went on to plunder the wealth and the artifacts and the gifts that had been accumulating inside of these harams since 1805 or 1806, from the time the Ottomans built it, all the way until 1925. All that wealth was looted and plundered. This is the wealth of Ali Muhammad, because everyone who has come and gifted it has gifted it to the shrine, yani the property of Ali Muhammad. They raised down the graves of Jannatul Baqee and flattened it, sand for sand. You would not be able to tell, like a war zone. And after all that rubble was cleared, sand over sand, you would not be able to tell what is a grave and what is not. They went to Jannatul Mu'alla in Makkah al-Mukarramah, and they performed the same feat as Jannatul Baqee and raised down the graves of anyone and everyone related to Rasulullah, including the grave of al-Mu'mineen Sayyidah Khadijat al-Kubra, the region of her wealth being spent in the way of Rasulullah that Islam was propagated to begin with. The grave of Imam Abu Talib alayhi salam and Abdul Muttalib. And they moved on to the graveyard and the mausoleums by the mountains of Uhud in the outskirts of Medina. And they raised down to the ground the haram of Asadullah and Asadur Rasul Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib Salamullahi alayhi. Today, in this day and age, tribute is paid to warriors and to men of service and military personnel who have played a key role in a war, in liberating a country, or so on and so forth. These shuhada who stood up to defend Islam against the polytheists and the mushrikeen, who defended Rasulullah with their lives and their souls, like Hamza. And who could come next to Rasulullah when Hamza was there? Just like Abu Sufyan, within these Ali Saud, you see the same image of Abu Sufyan and Bani Umayyah. As soon as Khilafah was given to Uthman ibn Affan, what did Abu Sufyan do? The historians mention Abu Sufyan went out to the graveyard of Uhud and kicked the grave of Hamza. And he said to Hamza, this leadership that you were propagating for Muhammad and fighting against us, this leadership has come to us today. Began to kick the grave of Hamza. And the same thing over here in 1925. These Wahhabiyah came and leveled the grave of Hamza. They didn't stop here. The target was to destroy the haram and the Qubbah over the grave of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. And as the news reached the Muslim Ummah and the dissemination of these fatwas of shirk and kufr and madrishu, the historians mention that there were protests that broke out across the entire Muslim lands. And those who stood out in their defense of Ali Muhammad were the Muslims of India, the Muslims of Syria, the Muslims of Turkey, and the Muslims of Iraq. History has recorded that these 4 to 5 countries, and the Muslim population of these 4 to 5 countries went above and beyond in terms of their mass protests and demonstrations. And there was a fear that there would be an uprising against Ali Saud if this grave of Rasulullah was to be destroyed. Which is why then they fabricated the story saying that from the Wahhabiyya, they fabricated the story. One, they used one of these so-called ulama of theirs, yani priests and scholars, not for Allah, but the scholars of shaitan, these people are. One of them claimed and said, I saw Rasulullah in my dream, and even though this is shirk and kufr, tawassul, Rasulullah has given us permission for the Qubbah to remain on top of his grave. So they changed their plan and they quelled down the heat within the Muslim Ummah. And for this reason, that Qubbah, the green Qubbah, is still upon the grave of Rasulullah for this reason. But if you were to go back to their books in terms of belief and theology, even the existence of that Qubbah under which they themselves pray is shirk and kufr. This belief in itself has dangerous ramifications. We will leave that for a different day in terms of consequences. Ahibai, we have a responsibility towards Jannatul Baqee. Do we have a responsibility towards making our voices heard in the commemoration? How Mutawakkil raised down the grave of Sayyid al-Shuhada, and we cry for this on the Masahib. Jannatul Baqee is supposed to evoke the same emotion. Jannatul Baqee is the destruction in front of us, 100-odd years now. Protests, demonstrations, from a political manner, even from a manner of archaeology, the delegations, Shia delegations holding talks with UNESCO and so on and so forth, are initiatives that are long overdue. And perhaps we have to ask ourselves, are we from those who are indifferent to the dhulm that has happened on Ali Muhammad? And this dhulm is evident and in front of us on a daily basis. Do you know the graves that are there in Jannatul Baqee? When you go to Jannatul Baqee for ziyarah, do you know the marking of the graves that you have for Sayyidah Baneen, and you have this one headstone, 4 of them lined together for the 4 Imams, and one that is for Sayyidah Fatima bint Asad? Do you know these gravestones? These gravestones didn't even exist. There was even no marking for these. When we said Jannatul Baqee was flattened to the earth, flattened, earth for earth. In one of a Majalis Fatiha in London, Ayatollah Sayyid Murtada al-Kazwini, Hafidahullah, may Allah grant him a long life, and he is from the Imam al-Jama'ah, one of the Imam al-Jama'ahs in the blessed shrine of Karbala al-Muqaddas, in the shrine of Imam al-Hussein, Salamullahi alayhi, Karbala al-Muqaddas. In a Majlis Fatiha in London years ago, I remember, I was not there at the Majlis, but this is recorded and is well circulated as well. He stated that even the markings that are there in Jannatul Baqee today, for these 4 graves, for the graves of Ahlul Bayt and the 4 headstones that you say, even these markings didn't exist. It was out of the efforts and the negotiations of marhum Ayatollah Sayyid Hasan al-Shirazi al-Shahid Rahmatullah alayhi, the founder of our Hawza Zainabiyya, through his extended efforts and vigorous efforts during the season of Hajj, within the 60s and 70s, that he would go and debate the ulama and the scholars of the Wahhabiyya and pressure them using these means and those means and these political connections and those political connections. And there is a lot that happened in regards to how close the Shia were to have Jannatul Baqee rebuilt until plans fell through, and that's a separate discussion. But after all this effort said and done on the efforts of Shaheed Hasan al-Shirazi rahmatullah alayh, you have the stones that you even find in Jannatul Baqee that are used as grave markers. Otherwise, even that would not have been there. فأحبائي, احنا we have responsibility, and each one that يفكر, each person thinks, what is my duty towards Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba? What is my duty towards Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad al-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi when it comes to this? I had istidlal that I had prepared in terms of a radd, in terms of a jawab against these misconceptions of shirk and tawassul. And every year, I try to make it a habit to present at least one proof from one angle or another angle when it comes to understanding the concept of tawassul. Zahiran, because we are short on time, ahibai, we will leave the istidlal, which is about the concept of salat and wilayah, because the entire argument is that you cannot recite salat at the graves of the imams. There is an entire istidlal taken from the Quran and from the hadith, from books of the Amma and the books of the Khassa, that show you the inseparable, these are the words, inseparable connection between salat and the wilayah. And perhaps, if we don't get a chance, perhaps inshallah, God willing, in the coming month of Shahr Muharram, inshallah, we will specialize and dedicate one lecture just to understanding the concept of salat and wilayah. And you know that these are one of the things we attest to in the ziyarah of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Ashhadu annaka kad aqamta as-salat wa atayta az-zakat wa amarta bil ma'rufi wa nahayta 'anil munkar hatta ataka al-yaqin. Ashhadu annaka kad aqamta as-salat. I bear witness that you, Ya Aba Abdullah alayhi salam, established the institution of salat. Meaning what? Had it not been for Aba Abdullah, there is no salat. The concept of wilayah and salat, wilayah within salat, wilayah within the actions of salat. Kalam kabir, ahibai. But in any case, one thing that I want for you to take home in this, when it comes to istidlal and the importance for us to educate ourselves when it comes to arguments like this. They say, oh, you can't recite salat at the graves of the Ahlul Bayt and the graves of the Imams and the graves of the Anbiya because it is shirk. We come back to the Quran for istidlal. Ahibai, if you were to return back to Suratul Baqarah, verse number 125. Suratul Baqarah, verse 125. Look at what Allah Azza wa Jal says. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. وَإِذْ جَعَلْنَا الْبَيْتَ مَثَابَةً لِلنَّاسِ وَأَمْنًا وَاتَّخِذُوا let me stop over here and translate. وَإِذْ جَعَلْنَا الْبَيْتَ مَثَابَةً لِلنَّاسِ. And when we made the house, يعني the Kaaba, a place of flocking for the people, a place of gravity for the people. وَأَمْنًا, and a place of safety. Now, look at the verse of the Quran. وَاتَّخِذُوا مِن مَقَامِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ مُصَلَّى. وَاتَّخِذُوا is a command tense. And take the Maqam Ibrahim to be what? A musalla, a place of salat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says within the Quran, a Quran which has not been distorted, Quran that all Muslims are in agreement with. Surah Al-Baqarah verse number 125. Akhaf, somebody comes and says, La, these are verses from a Shia Quran. Makushi, Baba, Quran for all Muslims. وَاتَّخِذُوا مِنْ مَقَامِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ مُصَلَّى, and take the place of the Maqam Ibrahim to be a place of salat. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is commanding you within the Quran to take the Maqam Ibrahim to be a salat. What is Maqam Ibrahim? Ya Muslimin, Allah Azza wa Jal is commanding you within the Quran, this area which Nabi Ibrahim stood on, this area which has the footprint of Nabi Ibrahim, this area where Ibrahim alayhi salam stood on with his blessed feet is so sacred, is so holy. Allah Azza wa Jal is saying, I want you to pray in this spot that has sanctity because Ibrahim stood on it. And because Ibrahim stood on it, pray to me and worship me, I will accept your worship. Now, if Allah Azza wa Jal in the Quran is commanding us to take the place where the feet of Nabi Ibrahim touched to be a place of salat, then what about that Medina Al-Munawwara that has the body of Rasulullah, who is Khatamul Anbiya and is the master of Ibrahim alayhi salam? How much sanctity does that Medina Al-Munawwara have? If the earth that Nabi Ibrahim stood on by virtue of Ibrahim being Ibrahim deserves to be a place of prayer, then what about where the body of Khatamul Anbiya lies? أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ, do they not contemplate over the Quran? Which is why, very strategically, I said in the beginning of the lecture that what we see from the deen and the actions of these people of the deen is nothing but a mockery of the religion on its own. Quran, sarih, clear in its explanation. This is the woe of the Muslims, and the destruction of Jannatul Baqee will remain a black chapter and the point of shame in the face of Muslims for how they desecrated Jannatul Baqee, and the point of shame for those who are indifferent towards the dhulm. May Allah Azza wa Jal give you and I the tawfiq to be passionate about the cause of Jannatul Baqee. And this starts, Ahibai, with the basics. A person establishes the next Husseiniya, the next Mawkib, the next madrasa, the next university. He names it Husseiniya Jannatul Baqee, Madrasa Jannatul Baqee, Mawkib Jannatul Baqee, in dedication of Jannatul Baqee. One room in my house, which is the room of Salat, I name it the house of Jannatul Baqee, the room of Jannatul Baqee. How we have posters of the Haram of Sayyid al-Shuhada and the Haram of Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam, framed and part of almost every Shi'i house. Same respect and same has to be accorded and afforded to Jannatul Baqee. How we have Shia artists around the world who have been skilled with the pen and skilled with art. They are able to draw portraits of the harams of Ahlul Bayt. They are able to draw portraits that depict historical events and histories. use your pen and your art to promote Jannatul Baqee. Those of us who are active on social media, whether it is Twitter or Instagram or TikTok or anything else, use your followers on social media to create awareness for Jannatul Baqee. Sah, I can't go into Hijaz and I can't physically go and build, or I can't do anything else. But I have followers. Ya Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba, Ruhi lak al-fida. I will use my status on social media, my influence on social media to promote your cause. Ya Sayyida Ummul Baneen, you gave me Al-Abbas, I will do this. Person uses their WhatsApp just to promote the commemoration of Jannatul Baqee. The reciters recite poetry and nawhas and marsiya in particular to Jannatul Baqee. The scholars and the lecturers give lectures, write books, and so on and so forth, until we are able to create this sense of ownership and responsibility. For so long as these two aspects in regards to Jannatul Baqee and Jannatul Mu'alla lack, status quo prevails, Ahibbabi. How much does this matter to me in my life? Hayr, so on. I complete tonight's lecture. And do not forget, even though this is a virtual lecture, that a person listens to a nawha, and it does matter even within the confines of his house, over this crime of Jannatul Baqee. Because be sure and have absolutely no doubt that it is on this night of the destruction of Jannatul Baqee, on a night like this or on a day like this, that from even there are veils around our eyes, have no doubt that is on a day like this, on a night like this, on an eve like this, that our master Maulana Sahib al-Amri wa Zaman, barefooted when it goes to Jannatul Baqee and weeps over the graves of his grandfather. Know that your Imam Sahib al-Amri wa Zaman, walks barefooted to the grave of Sayyida Ummul Baneen and weeps for her. This Mawla, who is there to participate in the grief of Imam Sahib al-Amr and to weep with him? Du'a Nutbah, who is there to weep with me? I'm with Imam al-Hujjah, who is there to weep with the Ma'soom Imam? And with this, I want to end, and I want to recite for you the Masaib of Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba alayhi salam today. Madloom Imam al-Baqee. The historians and the narrations tell us that when Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba was poisoned by his wife Ju'ada al-La'ina on the command of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, the intensity of the poison that was administered to Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba was such that it was poison that was mixed in yogurt granted to Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba on a summer day when he was fasting. And imagine those people who fast. You have just come out of Shahr Ramadan. And you know the difficulty if you're to eat the wrong type of food after a long fast. How does it hurt the insides? How does it hurt the body? Whether it's acidity or so on and so forth. This is Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba breaking his fast with poison. The historians mention that this was a poison procured by Muawiyah from the lands of Rome, such that if a drop of this poison was to spill on green earth, it would become barren due to the intensity of the poison. The narrations mention that Ju'da poisoned Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba. She mixed the poison in a drink of yogurt. The Ma'soom Imam broke his fast after reciting the Salatain al-Maghribain. He took the drink from the cup of yogurt, and the poison began to take its toll on Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba wa Imama wa Musibataya. Imam al-Mujtaba was able to feel the pain and the pangs of the poison immediately, and he said to her, O enemy of Allah, may the eternal damnation be upon you. Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba, suffering from the pangs of poison taking over his entire body, Imam al-Mujtaba becoming pale and weak. As the days passed, his body began to deteriorate further as the effects of this poison began to take over his body. The narrations mention at one time he was laying down on the bed, and Imam al-Hussein, Sayyid al-Shuhada, was by the side of his brother Imam al-Mujtaba. Imam al-Hassan had asked for a tasht in which Imam al-Hassan would be coughing and vomiting blood due to the intensity of the poison. The poison was such that at one point Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba began to cough up shredded and disintegrated pieces of his inside into the touched with blood. Allah, Allah. At one time he asked for the touch, and while he was coughing blood, they heard from the door that Sayyida Zainab al-Kubra is coming in to visit her brother Imam al-Mujtaba. When Imam al-Hassan heard this, he called out to Imam al-Hussein and he said to him, "O my brother Aba Abdullah, conceal the tasht under the bed from the eyes of Zainab." Imam al-Hussein asks, "Why should I conceal the tasht? Allah, Allah." Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba cried out, "O my brother Aba Abdullah, ya Zainab, this is Zainab. She will not be able to see me coughing blood into a tasht. Her heart is soft and her heart is tender. This is the daughter of Amir al-Mu'minin. Ya Imam al-Mujtaba, come to Karbala and see what Zainab has to say. This is Zainab who will witness all the atrocities and protect Rabab and protect Layla." The narrations mention that the intensity of the poison, it took its toll on Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba until his soul departed from this dunya. Imam al-Hussein with great difficulty gave the ghusl and the kafan, and it was from the will of Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba that he should be buried in the precincts and nearby his grandfather in Masjidun Nabawi. But Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba had also anticipated from the ilm al-ghaib that the people may try to prohibit the burial from taking place. So he said to Imam al-Hussein, "My wasiyah is that bury me next to my grandfather Rasulullah, and if you are not able to bury me there and there is problems, do not shed any blood and bury me in Jannatul Baqee." The narrations mention after the ghusl and the kafan, they prepared the tabut for Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba. Bani Hashim carried the janaza of Imam al-Mujtaba. The procession for the grandson of Rasulullah, Sayyid Shabab Ahlil Jannah, as the funeral procession came out from the house of Imam al-Mujtaba towards Masjidun Nabawi, the narrations mention that Aisha came with a group of people from Bani Umayyah, including Marwan ibn Hakam, and they stopped the procession and they prevented the procession from moving towards Masjidun Nabawi. At this point, Aisha cried out to Imam al-Hussein and towards the Bani Hashim. She was riding on a donkey. So she cried out and said, "Allah, Allah, ya Bani Hashim, la tadfunu fi bayti man la uhib." O Bani Hashim, do not bury in my house, yani the house of Rasulullah, do not bury in my house the person who I do not love. Allah, Allah. At this moment, Muhammad ibn Hanafiya stood up and came forward and said to her, "O woman, there was a day you came to fight my father on a camel, and today you try to fight us riding on a donkey." She then gave a command to Marwan ibn Hakam. The historians mention they shot arrows on the janazah of Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba. Historians mention that when the tabut was taken back to the house, Allah, Allah, Ya Allah, help the heart of Sayyida Zainab. What went through her heart when the janazah of Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba returned back to the house with arrows in them. Historians mention that 70 arrows were pulled out from the tabut of Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba. This is the last part of my Masa'ib, ya Ahibba'i, in honor of Sayyida al-Banin in Jannatul Baqee. Because the Masa'ib of Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas is Aziz for Sayyida al-Banin. The narrations mention that when the Bani Umayyah began to shoot the arrows at the janazah of Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba, Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas stood up and he put his hand on his sword. He cried out to Bani Hashim and he cried out to the Bani Umayyah. He says, "How dare you attack the janazah? How dare you attack the janazah of my brother Hasan al-Mujtaba, while Abbas is alive?" He put his hand on his sword. This is the lion of Ali, the lion of Allah. The narrations mention how much was the love of Abu al-Fadl for Imam Hassan, and what did it take for Abu al-Fadl to control his anger. The narrations mention that Imam al-Hussein, when he saw the anger of Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, he went towards him, Imam al-Hussein, to calm Abu al-Fadl down. What did he do? The narrations mention فَضَمَّهُ عَلَى صَدْرِهِ. Imam al-Hussein hugged Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. Allah, Allah. وَكَبَّلَهُ بَيْنَ عَيْنَيْهِ. Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, Imam al-Hussein, then kissed Abu al-Fadl on the forehead. And then he whispered in his ear, "Oh Abbas, this is not your day. There is another day for you." Yani the day of Karbala. Allah, Allah. Abu al-Fadl, ya Sayyida al-Banin. This is Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas obeying the command of Imam al-Hussein in regards to the janazah of Imam al-Mujtaba. Ya al-Banin, look at Abu al-Fadl on the day of Ashura. This is that Abu al-Fadl. He conquered the river of Furat and did not drink so long as his brother Imam al-Hussein is thirsty. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Allahumma inna nas'aluka bihaqqi Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba wa Imam Ali ibn al-Husayn Zayn al-Abidin wa Imam Mohamed ibn Ali al-Baqir wa Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad al-Sadiq wa bihaqqi Sayyida al-Banin. Allahumma ajil li waliyina al-faraj. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by the sake of the A'immatul Baqee, Ya Allah, hasten the reappearance of Imam al-Hujjah. Ya Allah, by the sake of Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba, give us the tawfiq to be passionate about Jannatul Baqee and to spread the word in regards to the madlumiyat of the A'imma of Jannatul Baqee. Ya Allah, help us to not be embarrassed in front of Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba because of our lack of interest and our indifference to the destruction of Jannatul Baqee. Ya Allah, by the sake of Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba, on this Thursday night, Ya Allah, Laylatul Jum'ah, forgive us our sins. Ya Allah, by the sake of Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba, and by the sake of A'immatul Baqee and Sayyida al-Banin, Ya Allah, Mu'mineen and Mu'minat who are faced with difficulties, every type of difficulty, Ya Allah, you ease for them their trials and their tribulations. Ya Allah, By the sake of the A'immatul Baqee and Sayyida Baneen, Mu'mineen and Mu'minat who are not in the best of health, you grant them Shafa'ah. Ya Allah, by the sake of the A'immatul Baqee and Sayyida Baneen, Marhumeen and Marhumat who have passed away, Ya Allah, you make their graves into a garden from the gardens of Jannah. Ya Allah, by the sake of A'immatul Baqee and Sayyida Baneen, Ya Allah, protect us in our Aqidah and in our Iman, and give us the tawfiq to die in the service of Ali Muhammad and to serve them until our final breath. وآخر الدعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. يقول الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه ماتم حسين ماتم حسن